speakers. Now, I'll have a brief summary of the challenges which our speakers refer to today. So we've got COVID, so we've got cases like crew repatriation and availability of ports. I remember we had one case, one of our clients had a deceased member on board and they were carrying this for months because they wouldn't disembark this. Now, war in Ukraine, several challenges, sanctions compliance, price cap, unavailability of full insurance cover, ships blocked in Ukraine, which more has to do with war insurance, and of course, increase of dark fleet with no mainstream insurance cover or not at all, as Ilias mentioned. And the risks which are imposing when an accident happens. The Pablo, as Ilias mentioned, I mean, salvors, they steered clear of the wreck over Sanctions fears. Now, and last, the regulatory challenges, shipping decarbonization within deadlines imposed by different bodies like IMO or EU, new marine fuels, and the ESG requirements in general, this ESG tsunami, as trade winds name it. Now, I have a list of more general questions to ask our panelists and more specific ones. I'll start with a general one. Out of all these challenges which we've referred to, which is, in your view, the most difficult one to deal or to cope with? Ilias, perhaps you want to take this one?
Okay. The most difficult one. The most difficult one, I think, is decarbonization. Because we haven't actually managed to agree on a fuel. There's a polyphony of experts saying this fuel, the other fuel. Let's do now carbon capture technology. Let's do this. So IMO is having a meeting at the end of the month. And this is one of the subjects that will be addressed. This is a challenge that is going to go forever. And if you think about it, the vessels that are going to be built now in 2050, where everybody has to comply, most probably will be scrapped. Or they will be the dark fleet of the time. So it's going to be very, very old. So I think it's the biggest challenge. And I sympathize fully with owners on that, because no one seems to take the responsibility. Refiners, for example, they don't seem to want to take the responsibility of this particular transition. And I think that's what we have to wait for. And this is going to be very, very intriguing.
Right. Gregory, you as a ship manager, ship owner, what do you think was the biggest challenge in the last 3 years?
Yes, I mean, considering the past, I would say the biggest challenge had to be, for us at least, the pandemic. Because we had to deal with the health of the crew. Health, not only that needed to take into consideration when people were traveling or we need to face with situations where the crew were on board, but also health regarding the mental health, that we needed to find a way to support them remotely. We had the open line as a way of communicating with seafarers for whatever needed to be reported. It's helped us to develop that, to make the mental health support and build a bridge to get closer to them. And this is something that we further developed to make it the one care. And we have it for trainings, we have it now for mental health that still exists. So that was the most difficult and how we managed to adapt and to develop. Also we had, because it was a matter, we signing on, signing off the crew, delays, and crew staying on board the vessels, not only for our management company, but I believe something was faced among all of us, more than their contract, 6 months, 12 months, and going further. And Beyond that, also technically and operationally, we had to face with unavailability of inspectors internally or externally that we also need to deal with, and we did. We did all that. We managed to deal with that with the technology that we were not aware that it was there for us, and still using it in 3D glasses and specialists communicating with the chief engineer or the chief officer on board, giving remotely solutions. And beyond that, operationally also, meaning that whenever you had a case, the vessel would be hauled for, depending the port, an unknown period of time. Whether this is 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, it really depended on the local authorities that we need to deal with. So in all aspects, in health, in cost, in operations, commercially, and of course insurance, I believe it was the most challenging one, and we managed to adapt, was the pandemic. And I really agree with Mr. Martin that we shouldn't say post, because we are still having. I'm here to share that in 10, 15 days ago, we had the case in our office. So we need to follow whatever we have experienced and learned from the recent measures. Having the people remotely work, bringing a specialist in order to make a disinfection to the office, and all this, we are still living. It's going to be still with us for a while. And I fully agree also with Mr. Tsakiris in respect of regulations and their support to the single plastic abandon, that it's going to come, and we need to be ready for a more sustainable solutions. That's all.
No, thank you, Gregory. Stephen, is that COVID? Is it growth issues with sanctions? What do you think was the biggest challenge for P&I clubs?
Well, I think the important point is for P&I clubs. For P&I clubs, although it had a great impact, COVID wasn't the biggest issue in terms of time and effort and uncertainty. I think actually it's the things we're talking about now. I think it's how an insurer like a mutual, like we are, manages the risks that are being brought to it on a sort of regular basis. How do we check out? How do we know how far to go when it comes to trying to assess that sanctions breach risk? But we have natural protections. I mean, the great thing about working in a P&I club is you are exactly on the same side as the ship owner. It's not like a property insurance where there may be a conflict between the insured and the underwriter. On the whole, the clubs work very closely with their members and have an identity of interest, and that tends to make things a little easier. Nor is it because there is insufficient protection within our contracts of insurance to make sure that the clubs are sound. I'll just read out a few. Here are some of the rules that relate to the issues of war and sanctions. We have a sanctions rule, believe it or not, which allows us to terminate an entry, not immediately, but quickly. We have a reinsurance rule. An awful lot of our risks are reinsured into the group, and reinsurance is the bedrock, is the sort of architecture, if you like, the foundation of the cover we provide. But our rule says that if we reinsure a risk and the reinsurers don't perform or become insolvent, then we, that is the club, don't have to pay for it. We have a rule that says that if you're involved in imprudent or illegal trade, then you won't be insured by the club. We have a rule that says that if you don't disclose every fact or matter that may be relevant to the risk, then the club can rescind the contract. We have a general rule allowing for 30 days notice of termination. It goes on. We have a war risks rule that says that if any sort of conflict breaks out between the 5 powers, then automatically cover is at an end. We have a rule that says that if you act otherwise than as a prudent uninsured, in other words, if you behave in a way that is inconsistent with the fact that you might be insured yourself, then you won't be covered. We have a willful misconduct or a reckless rule, which says that if you behave not just in a mistaken or negligent fashion, but in an obviously inappropriate fashion, you won't be covered. So that's quite a lot of protection. And you might think that the clubs are sort of, if anything, taking advantage of an opportunity to put in so many terms and conditions that will never be a cover. But it isn't for that at all. It's because we owe a duty to our, not just to individual members, but to the membership as a whole and to the club. And every decision we make at the moment when it comes to sanctions, ESG, or any of these things, is a decision that will have a great impact upon all of our membership. That's why, for the benefit of all of our membership, we have to try and make sure that we can exclude operators who don't match the quality standards that we seek. That's one of the problems with the dark fleet. It's not regulated. It's been cast out. And once cast out, it isn't subject to the quality and surveillance that reputable organizations provide, whether it be class or anything else. That's the worry about the dark fleet, is that it's an unregulated, illicit body involved in deceptive practices, by definition well concealed, and potentially very dangerous. And what does that say about the reputation that's on the line? Our reputation is on the line. If there's a major casualty and there's no insurance for it, because we're not insuring it, nor are any of the other reputable P&I clubs, if there's a major casualty, we will be criticized, we, the group, P&I clubs, no doubt will be criticized for not doing enough. And yet our position is that it's in order to ensure the quality of our entry that we impose these requirements. So that's a bit of a dilemma. And I think probably that is the hardest part.
Yeah, Sanctions and Stephen, thanks. Thank you. I have a question for Ilias, actually, in regards to sanctions, which is nowadays it's owners, underwriters, brokers, everyday life. And the problem lies with the fact that it is not a single party, like the leading Hellenic machinery underwriter, doing the due diligence, but several, which be also subject to different set of sanctions between different jurisdictions or different interpretation of sanctions, as Stephen said earlier. These parties might come back with different sanctions check results, which affect the provision of insurance cover. But to put it more clearly, you might have a vessel's voyage, and more often than not, cannot confirm 100% cover, Hellenic machinery, I'm talking about Hellenic machinery, which obviously it's a minefield for brokers who have to ensure cover. So have you addressed this issue at IUMI committees perhaps? How can owners, brokers cope with these problems? What do you think? Well, of course, let alone the speed of response from compliance department, as you mentioned. Yeah.
First of all, a sanction is not something that we, as insurers, decided to impose to our clients. This is the law. The problem is that because we live in a global environment, Japan, for example, has different sanction regulations against Europe or United States.
Switzerland as well, Switzerland,
and so you name it. So every underwriter, on the other hand, every insurer as an entity itself, he has to abide by the law. So that's why you see individual sanction checks by every single insurer, because they need to satisfy their compliance department and extend their regulators that we have done a proper job. It's so severe if we insure something which is not, we shouldn't supposed to insure, that the existence of the actual insurance company is it's at stake. So what we can do there is that, first of all, we have seen a lot of underwriters lately making a blanket exclusion of Russia, for example, or Belarus, and saying, forget it, we're not insuring at all. And this has nothing to do, it's about the risk of their taking, of insuring something that they shouldn't have. So what every underwriter is doing as diligently as possible. We rely on these databases, unfortunately. If the database, for example, makes a mistake, you're done. The owner is done, the broker is done. Or think about it when there are worse scenarios. I can give you a worse scenario. Insure somebody when you're having the claim to be paid, he has become sort of sanctioned. What do you do there? He has every legal right to sue you, but you cannot go against the law to reimburse him. So I would say that even though IUMI is trying to weave through and find, let's say, some sort of a uniform, one-size-fits-all, it's impossible because we rely as insurers to our reinsurers. Reinsurers have been taking, reinsurance industry generally has taken a very, very severe stance against, let's say, Russia, especially for Russia, as we talk now. So even if you are allowed on a national stage to insure somebody, if your insurer blocks you, that makes it very, very difficult then. So I would say that the answer of your question is no answer.
Not that helpful, but I mean, Gregory, as a ship manager, ship owner, do you think that the insurance industry has responded adequately and efficiently to protect the owner's interest on all challenges which you faced during the last 3 years?
I believe yes, they have. As I said earlier in the beginning of the discussion, we were privileged enough to be insured against pandemic, but that benefit lasted only as long as the validity of that coverage. Beyond that, I mean, it ended. And then, obviously, we were like everybody else. The matter that we had to face was, as a ship owning and ship management company, that we knew that we necessarily needed to be in line and in compliance with regulations. But when a client requirements derives that we want to operate in an area where are the sanctions, then we needed to be strict of that line that unfortunately was against commercial, and we needed to be in compliance as well also for those clients. And that means that we needed to end some of quite fruitful cooperations just in only to be in compliance.
Good. Thank you. I have a question for Ilias and Stephen. Back to sanctions and the price cap attestations which you obtain or supposed to obtain from ship owners. Do you think that you, as insurers, you are adequately protected in terms of compliance with obtaining the attestations?
Do you mean, do I think that the attestation process is a good one, or are we?
Yeah.
I mean, it's difficult. I can't pretend to be entirely convinced by the price cap mechanism. But if we're talking about does the attestation requirement work, I think it works in the sense that we have proper due diligence. We are entitled to, and we do find out an awful lot about our members and what they're doing. Our members know, and we've sent circulars to warn them, that they must attest to the fact that they're complying with the price cap requirements. They must do so. They can do so for a year, but they must do that. And if they don't so attest, then they're not insured for the voyage in question. I mean, inevitably, we have members who join us and who leave us. We look very carefully at the members who leave us in order to see whether or not, with the benefit of hindsight, there's been any failure on our part to ensure the necessary information. On the whole, things are pretty compliant. But now and again, you find out about an STS. You wonder how many of them there were for that fleet. Now and again, you find that the attestation is rather vague. Now and again, you find that all the details, the additional details that you're supposed to understand, it's not just attestation and price cap, there's a third thing, and that thing is just finding out about the ownership and the history and all of the things that sort of make up the character of a risk. I think we have found one or two instances where there haven't been sufficient precautions and information made available. So, I mean, you could say that every time we discover that, it's a failure, but I would prefer to say that on the whole, the attestation process works well with the clubs. You may think that there must be other, better ways, but insofar as the fact that this is the existing regime, this is the hinterland, this is what we have to live with, I think it works reasonably well. Having said that, many people will tell you that a significant proportion of the dark fleet, whatever dark fleet is entered in a P&I club, which tells you two things. One, that people are not so risk averse as to avoid it altogether. And two, that it may well be, in the case of a dark fleet, that it's operating legally. We need to bear that in mind. Nobody has come up and said dark fleet means, by definition, deceptive shipping practices. The phrase deceptive shipping practices has emerged, has been created as shorthand for something that shouldn't be done. But I think we need to bear in mind that it is perfectly legal, if you operate within the restraints of the conventions, to operate without bringing in P&I clubs in the way that we would like. I don't know whether that answers your...
Yeah, my question a bit further. So the reinsurers, your reinsurers, are happy with you getting the attestations, so they're happy that the cover is in place, the reinsurance cover is in place. Because you're tier 3, insurers are tier 3, so I mean, you don't have to make the due diligence themselves. I think we touched, actually we exhausted the sanctions, or almost exhausted the sanctions issue. So I'll go to a different challenge, which has been highlighted by Ilias as well, and that's the ESG topic. We see there's an increased trend for marine insurance to be involved in the shipping company's ESG compliance process. I've seen recently Poseidon Principle Clause being introduced to hull policies. Would ESG compliance become a focal point of your risk assessment process, Ilias?
First of all, either we agree or disagree. The ESG, again, is something that has been mandated by the United Nations. Poseidon Principles for Marine Insurance is an initiative that took place in December 2021, and it involves only hull underwriters, and we are measuring the carbon footprint of our existing portfolio and against the two trajectories. One is the IMO trajectory of 2050, and the other one is for zero, which it appears that IMO might adopt the zero footprint by 2050, as it appears. Poseidon will not be there to deny insurance cover to anyone. It's a metric, and it's not a condition that will render you uninsured. We need to help our clients to this transition. Insurance industry is evolving, and it's not anymore like a client. We don't see any more owners as clients. We get to see them as we are partnering with the owners now on the risk management as such, because it's also for us very essential that we don't fall behind. And understanding, let's say, all this new technology helps us understand how to assess the new risks. Once assessing the new risk, we will be able to insure these risks. And if this risk also is insurable in one sense. But that's what Poseidon Principle is. So I don't think it's going to be a focal point for everyone, because, for example, there's not going to be any finance. The way it goes, finance is directly related to sustainability goals that every owner wishes. There is a trend now that if it's not dual-fueled vessels, they won't find any finance whatsoever. So it's more like the finance world than the insurance that they might impose certain issues, but not for the insurance as such.
Right. I suppose, Stephen, I suppose that's more to do with the hull industry, the hull market, rather than the P&I clubs. Although some P&I clubs have joined the Poseidon Principles, so they have adopted the principles, but they are more on their hull side, I suppose, not on the P&I.
I was hoping you'd say that, so I didn't have to say anything. I think we're just part of the discussion. We take it very seriously. Our members take it seriously because they have to have customers, and their customers have to be satisfied about the steps they've taken. But what you said is right, and
Okay.
I've got nothing to add to that.
Gregory, as ship managers, would you be willing to be transparent with your insurers in regards to your decarbonization strategy? How would you be incentivized to do that?
As ship owners and also as ship managers, I mean, transparency is the only way. I cannot find any other possible way. Not only in collaboration with the insurance, but with all the third parties, whether this involves regulatory, clients, insurers, hull underwriters. This is the only way going forward. And out of all this that we've been passing through these years, collaboration was what kept us, the force that kept us going out of this successfully and learn out of this. Also, very important is what has been discussed regarding the risks and how these risks to be analyzed and there to be covered. We still have a long way to go in respect of risks generated and will be generated out of cybersecurity, various threats that we will have to deal with this. But going back to your last, I fully agree that transparency is the only way. And as Columbia, we have developed ourselves well in advance. That goes 5 years ago with developing our own performance optimization control room that now has developed to the one link, and we are able to monitor and bring suggestions regarding decarbonization and what needs to be done in order to be efficient and commercially, let's say, more attractive for the vessels. It's no other way. I mean, the pools by themselves, even before being implemented, have been asking for this, where we see ourselves, where we are ranking ourselves. So we needed to be there well in advance, and luckily we are.
Yeah. So do you experimenting with alternative fuels? Or your owners, the owners you manage ships for?
We have vessels with dual fuels. We have vessels taking different kind of bunkers according to the commercial needs. Obviously, this kind of changes need to be properly assessed and thereafter in cooperation with the risks and with the clients properly deal with.
Yeah. And I suppose it's a bit early in the process to know if that increased the risk for insurers or...
Yes, of course. And this is always in line in communication with them. For us, this is very important, and that is why we consider on a daily basis to keep in alignment all the departments. What we do is quite early in the morning, we have these very important meetings that we involved all the directors, including also the insurance and claims department, so that major items such as this are being properly addressed.
Good. Okay. I have a last question for all of you. That is, what lies ahead? Lessons learned over these last 3 years. What do you feel needs to be done further to deal with the uncertainty? Stephen?
Well, I can give you an obvious answer, and that is that we should continue and hopefully succeed in pursuing discussions with the authorities. If you really think about some of the issues and some of the troubles we've had in terms of interpreting sanctions and prohibitions, it's because we don't really know exactly how the authorities are thinking about it. If there was some magic way in which we could understand better and they could understand the P&I Club's position better, that would be helpful. But as to whether there's one single thing that will enhance the experience, I don't know. I think there's a lot of factors that matter a great deal, including the availability of reinsurance, actually, to go back to where we started.
Good. Ilya?
First of all, the lesson learned from pandemic was that we managed to cooperate better. Believe it or not, we cooperated better with our own clients, with all the stakeholders managed to cooperate better because it was there was not you shouldn't have arranged the meeting, for example. You can always call on a Teams, and so immediately we saw better cooperation during these discussions during pandemic. we've realized that an open dialogue and being transparent and accountable on all your decisions can actually take you a very long way with your clients and the other way around. So what lies ahead, because of these uncertainties, we have to be on a more cooperative basis and a more transparent between us. Otherwise, I think we're going to be facing again and again the same problems and forgetting what has happened. In a few years, we will forget, and then another crisis will happen. And I think we need to be educated now because of that. And we need to learn that insurance is an industry that insures uncertainties. When things are becoming certain, that's when it becomes uninsurable.
Thank you, Ilias. Gregory?
Yes, I think we all touched in that respect in our previous speeches. We discussed about the transparency. I also discussed earlier regarding what's coming in respect of cybersecurity and the threats that may arise from there. We also talk about autonomous vessels, which also will raise interest in respect of insurance and coverage and risks arising from there. But as already mentioned, the most important was that we managed to come out of this pandemic and war and all the other period that came successfully cooperating, collaborating with each other, and it looks like the future is going to be sustainable. And let's not wait for regulations to be raised and be sensitive in that respect. We should act in advance.
Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Do we have time for questions? Okay, all right. Any questions? Anyone? Any difficult ones? Nothing. I think everything was very clear. Everybody got the answers he was waiting for, so I think we can move on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.